The candlelight flickers across the glass. Inside, rows of jars line the wall. Amber, ochre, black. Each is labeled in Latin, in the careful hand of a physician, pulvis mummiae Egyptiaci, Egyptian mummy powder. The room smells of herbs and alcohol and something else, a sweetness gone sour, like resin left too long over a flame. Mortars and pestles rest on stained wooden shelves, their bowls dusted with the ghosts of past remedies. A customer waits by the counter, a nobleman in fine wool, pale with sickness, one hand pressed to his chest as if holding something inside that won't stop slipping away. The apothecary measures a spoonful of brown dust, its scent sharp and bitter. He mixes it with wine, watching the particles swirl like smoke in dark water. He sets the cup down gently and whispers,
Taken daily, it restores the vital spirits. The Egyptians believed these bodies defied time. Now that strength is yours.
The nobleman hesitates only a moment before he drinks. The taste is foul, but he forces it down, swallowing hope and history in one grimace. This is Europe, 1565, an age of learning, faith, and superstition woven so tightly they're indistinguishable. And across the continent, the dead of ancient Egypt are being eaten in the name of medicine. It began as a mistake, a mistranslation that metastasized into belief. For centuries, Persian and Arabic physicians had used the word mumia to mean natural bitumen, the sticky tar found in the earth, thought to help with bruises and broken bones. When European scholars pored over these texts, hungry to reclaim lost wisdom, they made an assumption. If mumia healed, and Egyptian corpses were dark and resinous, then the drug must come from the tombs themselves. So the word shifted. Bitumen became bodies, and a linguistic error turned into a medical doctrine. By the 14th century, mummy in European pharmacies no longer meant a substance from the ground. It meant the ground-up remains of a human being. Doctors prescribed it for nearly everything: headaches, bruises, nosebleeds, internal bleeding, epilepsy, even the plague. Some believed that a violent death, especially execution, trapped a kind of raw vitality in the flesh. Consuming it, they argued, could transfer that force to the living. To heal, you didn't just take medicine. You ingested someone else's unfinished story. By the 1500s, mumia was one of Europe's most valuable drugs, traded by the pound, worth more than many spices. In Egypt, the demand did not go unnoticed. Caravans began carrying not just grain or textiles, but the desiccated dead. Merchants scoured ancient necropolises, prying open tombs that had been sealed for millennia. They dragged linen-wrapped bodies into the sun, tore bandages away, scraped resin from bones. What had once been a sacred attempt to preserve the soul's vessel for eternity became raw material for European medicine. At first, they sought the ancient ones, priests, nobles, pharaohs, believing age increased potency. These were sold at higher prices, advertised as coming from royal or high mummies. But soon, anything would do. As the supply of genuine pharaonic mummies dwindled, the trade turned grotesque. Fresh corpses were embalmed with tar and local resins, wrapped in linen, and baked in the desert heat until they looked suitably ancient. Executed criminals, the poor, even plague victims were transformed into counterfeit antiquities. These fakes flooded the market, and almost no one in Europe could tell the difference. Apothecaries bought them by the crate. physicians ground them into powder. Patients swallowed them, never knowing whether they held a fragment of a pharaoh or a nameless thief hanged by the roadside. By the Renaissance, Europe's most learned men were consuming the dead. Kings and scholars alike trusted in mumia. Francis I of France reportedly carried powdered mummy in a pouch at his belt, a royal first aid kit, taken at the first sign of illness. In England, physicians like Thomas Sydenham recommended preparations containing mummy as part of their most respected remedies. Even great innovators like Paracelsus didn't reject the practice outright. He argued that the power in human remains came from an invisible life force, a kind of cosmic imprint left in the tissues, which could be transferred to the sick. In rich homes, the remedy became a sign of status. To offer a guest a draught containing mummy was to say, "I have access to the ancient world. I can afford the medicine of kings." To them, this was sophistication, a fusion of classical learning and cutting-edge care. To us, it is something closer to ritualized cannibalism, wrapped in the language of science and taste. Not all mummy powder was swallowed. Some of it was painted. By the 1700s, artists across Europe and Britain were using a pigment known as mummy brown, a rich, translucent paint made from ground human remains mixed with oils and resins. It was prized for glazing shadows, for giving skin and fabric a warm, aged tone. On the palette, it looked like any other umber. On the canvas, it added depth, a subtle darkness that seemed to hum beneath the surface. In London's art shops, customers could buy it in packets or tubes, often without asking too many questions. The name itself, Mummy Brown, sounded exotic, romantic, almost whimsical. One 19th-century painter, upon learning what the pigment truly contained, held a small funeral in his garden. He took the tube outside, dug a hole, and buried it, as if laying a person to rest. He said he could not, in good conscience, keep painting with someone. Others were less sentimental. They kept using it. The color was too beautiful to let go. Most of us imagine Egypt's tombs looted for gold, glittering treasures ripped from the dark. But for centuries, the most valuable treasure was flesh. Mummies were shipped by the crate from Alexandria and Cairo, stacked in holds like lumber. Some were sold as curiosities to private collectors. Others were broken up on arrival, their parts sorted: skulls, limbs, bandages, resin. In port cities, locals complained about the smell when shipments were unloaded. That didn't stop the trade. Profit rarely does. It wasn't just the pharaohs who were consumed. Peasants, workers, children, anyone embalmed and buried in that dry, preserving climate could be exhumed, stripped, and transformed into product. By the 18th century, entire burial grounds had been stripped bare. Those who raided them weren't searching for artifacts to display. They were harvesting raw material for Europe's pharmacies and studios. In the end, the tombs didn't just lose their treasures. They lost the very bodies they were built to protect. Egypt's dead became Europe's cure and its commerce. The mummy trade became another arm of empire. As European powers pushed deeper into Egypt and the Middle East, they treated the past as something to be excavated, catalogued, and owned. Museums wanted sarcophagi. Collectors wanted whole bodies. Doctors and artists wanted whatever could be ground, bottled, and shipped. Unwrapping a mummy became a fashionable spectacle in 19th century Europe. Invitations were sent out. Guests gathered in drawing rooms to watch as linen was slowly peeled away from a face that hadn't seen light in thousands of years. Some treated it like a scientific demonstration. Others treated it like entertainment. Either way, the result was the same. Another ancient body reduced to fragments and souvenirs. It's easy to look back and feel superior, to imagine that we would never have taken part. But the people in those rooms believed they were doing something noble, bringing the past into the present, freeing knowledge from the tomb. They did not see themselves as devouring a civilization. They saw themselves as inheriting it. By the mid-19th century, medicine was changing. Microscopes revealed a world of invisible organisms. Chemists could isolate compounds and test their effects. The idea that you could simply consume the preserved dead to gain vitality began to look, even to doctors, less like wisdom and more like superstition. But the appetite didn't stop overnight. Remedies containing mummy lingered in apothecaries. Old habits and old beliefs have long half-lives. Even once mumia started to vanish from prescriptions, the logic behind it survived. People still sought miracle cures, exotic substances, the promise that somewhere in the world there existed a shortcut to health and longevity, if only you were willing to pay enough or believe hard enough. Mummy Brown, the artist's pigment, lasted even longer. One London supplier claimed to have sold it into the 20th century. When asked what happened when they finally ran out of mummies to grind, the owner reportedly said, "We used up what we had, and when the last mummy was gone, that was that." 5 centuries of appetite ended not with a reckoning, but with a shrug. Not because the practice was morally condemned, but because the resource, the dead, was exhausted. What's left today is not the dust of Egypt's kings, but something harder to name. We walk through galleries and look at mummies behind glass, their bandages neat, their faces dark and still. We read plaques that speak of ritual and belief, of journeys to the afterlife, of care taken to preserve the body for forever. Most of those bodies survived conquest, flood, and time itself. Many did not survive us. We built museums to enshrine what our ancestors devoured and called it preservation. We speak of unlocking the secrets of the pharaohs, but rarely talk about how many of those secrets were swallowed, painted over, or sold in apothecary jars. There is a strange comfort in thinking of the past as a resource, something we can mine for meaning, for identity, even for health. But the story of mummy powder shows where that comfort leads when it goes unchecked, when curiosity becomes entitlement and reverence becomes appetite. Somewhere beneath the desert sand, Egypt remembers what the world forgot. That every secret has a body, and that bodies, even ancient ones, are not ours to eat. The story of the mummy powder isn't really about medicine. It's about faith. Faith that death could be defeated, that the essence of another person could be taken into ourselves and used as a shield against our own mortality. For 500 years, Europe believed it was borrowing the strength of the ancients. But in truth, it was repeating a much older ritual, the belief that if you consume what you fear, you can control it. We changed the setting, the language, the jars on the shelf. We never changed the instinct. Today, we no longer drink the dead of Egypt. But we still chase miracle cures, still plunder the past for comfort, still believe that if we just find the right story or relic or pill, we can bargain with time. The mummy powder craze is over. The fear that fed it is not. Centuries later, in a small town in Germany, another story took shape. Not of the dead we consumed, but of the living led away. Where the apothecaries of Europe devoured the past, Hamelin's piper stole the future. Both believed in transformation, in a song or a cure or a promise too powerful to question. And both left behind the same silence. In the next episode of Lore and Ruin, we follow that silence to the town that lost its children.